Good evening and welcome to week 3 of this webinar series for the nature of the human being, fire, air, water, and earth. And what does it mean to be a human being? I'm terrifically excited for this evening's talk because there's so very much that I want to share. And I'm also, to be quite frank, a little bit overwhelmed, or I'm so conscious of how much I want to arrive at tonight. So let's see how far we can get and hope I can bring it all in a coherent form. The title for our lecture tonight is The Four Elements and the Human Being, a tremendously big topic, but I'll come back and anticipate that with you in just a moment. But as always, I would like to begin this lecture by reciting for you this wonderful poem that we've been hearing every week. I was born from the stars, and so on. So as I speak this, my mind is going like this as I experience this contracting from the spiritual world into the four elements and then into my body. So with my mind, I'm doing this. If you want to do this with your hands, please do. All right. I was born of the shining of distant stars. I drew their beams with me from afar. I was born of the gold of the radiant sun, of the light of the world ere the earth begun. Born I was of the silver eye, of the guardian moon keeping watch on high. Born of the flame's intensity, born of the wild winds roaming free, born of the waves that lap the shore and the rock that hides the glittering ore. Born I was from out of the whole. I bear the world within my soul. And yes, that is one of the most satisfying poems that I can work with, both in recitation and in eurythmy. And someday in one of our webinar series, I'm going to bring that as our study material. So, as I already called the attention of my Tuesday morning people to the fact that we are really now at the Samhain festival, the week of Dia de los Muertos, the week of All Souls and All Saints Festival, which belong to the Halloween festival. And this is also Samhain, which is halfway between the autumn equinox and the winter solstice. And this is considered a time of thresholds, as really we put the summer behind us now, and we enter into the darker time of the year where cultures around the world have celebrated the passage into death. And those cultures which understand the spiritual world know that those who have died are really right here with us. Last night, as is our custom here in my community, our Anthroposophical Society group got together and we had a festival acknowledging and remembering those who had died. Each individual brought memories of their own person. Sometimes we can bring candles and sometimes we can bring photographs, but because of mask mandates and flames, we couldn't do that this time, but it didn't matter. We gathered in the room and made ourselves conscious about how those who have died are, as I said, living in the space with us. And so what a difference that is between them who are not living in the four elements and we who are. But we have an understanding that those who are living in the spiritual world are richly nourished by our thoughts, by our memories of them, and by our spiritual awareness, and by our prayers. And so we filled this evening with a lot of awareness. We did music performances and eurythmy performances so that those who sat and watched could feel that they were weaving in, I mean this very carefully, they were weaving in the etheric world. And this etheric world is where the souls of the dead can weave, especially in the beginning when they're still close to the earth. So this was our journey. And we have a very well-known member of our community, Brian Gray. Some of you have heard of him. Some of you might even know him personally. And he gave the keynote speech last night. And he spoke then in memory of his own father. And in speaking, he then spoke about the work that we can do in cultivating a relationship to those who are not living in these four elements. And he spoke then about how in the spiritual world, in this non-born condition, souls cannot have the clear cognitions that we can have. So I used to think that when we die, we suddenly get it all. That's what I used to think. Some people think you just disappear, but some people think, boom, I'm dead, and now I understand everything. And Rudolf Steiner, our teacher in anthroposophy, said, we only get that understanding if we've already developed it on the earth. So for those of you who are already studying spiritual science, and very, very, very much for those of you who are doing eurythmy, we're already gaining the access into that realm that we meet after death. And an important sentence here is, after we die, we can only open up the understanding that we've already sought for on the earth. So if you've already been asking questions, what is spirit? You can open that door after you die. But a person who was a materialist and who only believes in the earth element, what you can see and touch and weigh and measure, such a person doesn't have the questions. And so when they die, they have no perceptions, but they can be helped by us. And then, as Brian said last night, when we can speak to them and bring spiritual thoughts, we can open this world to them. But those who have died, as I started this little prelude with, those who have died don't have the analytic, clear consciousness that you and I have. Could never write a book, read a book, use a computer, of course, drive cars, no, but also trees and flowers and all of these things are not visible to them. But we can talk to the people about them. We can share with them our insights, even as they can share with us their insights. And I bring all of this as a kind of prelude to say, actually, we are alive on the earth for a very short time, a matter of decades. And what we do on this earth by developing our clear consciousness is so important. We can't do that anywhere else in the way that we can do this here. And in practicing this clear consciousness, we develop what we've already been referring to as our I am consciousness, our self-awareness, prerequisites for being free. And with that, we open the question, how can we make best use of this time on the earth? We need to be fully grounded, full participants in our acts of consciousness, thinking, in our art, in our acts of loving, feeling, and in our will. And I know I've said a couple of times already in other contexts, so few people are properly grounded in our time, but we need to be all the way in. And to the extent that we can be mindful of the fact that this is a very precious and unique opportunity to awaken, we can really, once again, remind ourselves to value this earth. There really is no other planet out there that we go to after we die. We go into other states of awareness, and depending on our degree of spiritual development, we can stay conscious further and further and further. We go into these other realms, but there's no Jupiter or Saturn or other galaxy to go to. And this is part of our study of the four elements. Everything that's here in this remarkable state of existence that we are in belongs to us. And we just need to say how beautiful it is to think all of the thoughts and ideas and inspirations and things of the Creator are right here in their dressed up, I would say, in the elements that they're wearing. Yes, so a tree won't look like a tree in the spiritual world, but your understanding of tree is a true spiritual, a door to a spiritual being, actually. So much more we can say about that. We'll touch that a little bit next week in the talk about the four elements and elemental beings. We'll look at that later. So what do we have here on the earth? As it says in this poem, we have, I was born out of the stars. What are stars? They're not just balls of gases, which our contemporary way of thinking considers them. The stars are, we could say, the homes, manifestations of spiritual beings, high, lofty beings. I was born out of that realm. I was born out of the sun and all the other planets. They are here. Also home for spiritual beings, ones that are a little closer to us. I was born out of the moon. And then I was born into fire and air and water and earth. So there's an ancient teaching that many of you know that speak about macrocosm and microcosm. Do you all know that phrase? Of course, I can't see you nodding or shaking your heads, but the macrocosm and microcosm duality is ancient wisdom. It means that all of the stars and suns and all of that is part of our world. That's the macrocosm. And essences of all of those things can be found in this world, in our colors and fragrances and so on. So the macrocosm, and then we live in the microcosmic natural world. So if I were to draw this on my blackboard, whiteboard, I would draw all the stars, big periphery, and at the center of it, a globe. This is our natural world. And all of that periphery has made this world. In the process then, between that periphery and this world, I would also try to indicate balls of fire. So the first thing, please stay with me here. Yeah. The first thing is that creator consciousness, We could say Father God, but we could say Zeus, or we could, however we name our creator, had a thought about, why don't I make a world that has everything that I am in it? But Creator God didn't have hands and feet, didn't even have hammer and nail, chisel. He had a thought. And that thought was fire. Do you remember? I'm beginning to talk about these 4 stages of evolution that we spoke of last time, even as I talk about macrocosm. So Creator God has intensity of being, will, desire, creates fire. And out of fire, then, Creator God and all of Creator God's loving servants, if you will, created air, ancient sun, right? The A here, I have ancient Saturn. The A means ancient, before the beginning of time. Ancient sun, long before the Big Bang, long before the Big Bang. Ancient moon, watery, the beginning of the watery condition, and then earth. So I'm still talking about macrocosm and microcosm. Microcosm, this earth was created, and we were part of this story from the beginning of time. And now microcosm has another meaning as well, because microcosm also means you and every human being that you look at. We are all microcosms, ourselves. Inside your body, you have all of it. How can that be? Do you have all of the plants inside you? Well, certainly not literally, but you have the same formative forces that made the plants you have in your body in many different ways. And with your mind, you have not only the forces of all the plants, but with your mind, you have the understanding of all the plants. You also have the gold and different metals inside of yourself. If not physically, then as essences. What could it mean that we have the animals inside of us? I certainly don't mind saying I have a whole zoo inside myself. I have monkeys and tigers and clever crows and big, lazy whatever's inside. I've got all of it inside my soul. So all of the macrocosm is inside of us. And then there's the core of the human being. So let's go a little bit deeper into all of this and say, what do we have? Now, we talked about this on the first week. Let's see if we can pick this up. Once again, ancient Saturn was in a condition of fire, which is how can I hope you can understand this simple thought, the most profound one, but very simple, but we'll need it all the way through tonight. Fire is, if you will, the membrane between pure being and the manifestation of being. Make that personal, please. Think about yourself. And if you want to do something, you have to put it out of yourself. This is our human individualized correspondence to what Creator God does in putting something outside. And can you call that in yourself a primal fire? I'm going to build myself a tiny house. I'm going to plant a garden. I'm going to write a book. This energy to go outside is our legacy of the original fire, Saturn. And then, once again, to repeat what we did the beginning, we talked about the alchemical process and the process of condensation. In ancient sun, this fire began its alchemical process and solidified to air. And we're going to talk a lot more about that as we go forth tonight. And then that all dissolved, and then we had another solidification, water. And then we have earth, wrong color, black, earth. Very clearly, this is all around us in nature, right? We spoke about that also in the first week. Where do we find earth, pure earth in nature? In the rocks, of course, and stones. Where do we find pure water? On the one hand, we find free water in the rain and the clouds and the rivers. And we also have living water, and we'll have to get in and parse that a bit more tonight and next week. Living water is manifested in plants because plants have a body of life. Again, we need to work more on that. So plants have earth and water, or a physical body and an etheric body. I'm going to add my next column here. Minerals have a physical body. That body obeys only the laws of the physical world. Just physical. It doesn't grow. Its change is only the changes of lifelessness if it would deteriorate. So now I need to write minerals on here. And I already told Michelle before we started, I need about 6 blackboards for tonight. Okay. And where do we find water? As I said, we find it in the rain and so on, but also in plants. Plants have a physical body and an etheric body. Like that. 2 bodies. Now, those of you who've been working on your anthroposophy already for a while, you know that the next stage is the animals. Animals, of course, are alive, and so they also have an etheric body, and they have a physical body. And what we name that extra part of them the astral body, which is an air body. And it manifests in the capacity to breathe. And then the 4th one here, of course, I want to write the human being, but I want to make it a little bit trickier and say, let's call the 4th one the self-realized spiritual consciousness. How would that be? Which I should write human, but I want to make it a bit more tricky because maybe we can say that we aren't really human beings yet. We have a lot of work to do to become fully human. And that would be what we'll call the ego body. And the ego body has all of these. Okay. So if you have a quick question here, you can type it in. I have a lot more to go through, but if you've got a question, I would take it now. Looks like none are coming in. I'll give you another half a minute. Okay. Okay, keep going. Question. How is our spirit self, our consciousness, capable of touching matter? How can we do that? Because this is a foreign element to your spirit. God, if we call him God, her, could not could not create the earth right away. God had to set this process in motion with fire, let it condense, and Creator had to stand back and say, grow, change, become independent of me. How did you get inside that body? And make that question as hard for yourself as you can. How does this work for you, for your inner self? And we don't want to think of ourselves just as a machine. We want to think of ourselves as this burning activity. How can you do that? And that's going to be tonight's question, one of the two. I want to talk about what it's like to wear a body and how we digest food, how we interact with substance. And then I want to track the wisdom of that a little bit if we can get that far through the process of embryology, if we can, or fossil learning. I do see one question. Is it relevant, Michelle, or?
Sorry, I had to find my unmute button. Tish asked, fire is membrane between what two things?
Between the non-manifest world and the manifest world.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll turn to the earth now. That the Big Bang, whatever that was not here, was not here, was not here. If the Big Bang happened the way that some contemporary models say that it happened here at the beginning of this earth. All of this was pre-earth in any case. And yet we must imagine, and even the astrophysicists aren't expecting the Big Bang to have been an immediate occurrence of material. It would have been an immediate occurrence of so-called energy and fire, which only gradually created the planets and so on. And in the picture that we have out of the wisdom of anthroposophy, we say when Earth happened, all of the things that had been prepared before Earth, Saturn, Sun, Moon, fire, air, water, all of these, which had the intention of becoming the human kingdom and the earth we're living in, all of these were in, we could say, one great etheric cosmos, huge, huge, one great living, feeling world, and not yet material. And we have names for these. And I'd like to write them on my other blackboard. There's a fancy recapitulate, fancy. Are you going to be able to see it? I see that the light is reflected here, but would that be okay for you?
It's not bad. I think it's going to be fine.
Thank you. Okay. In creating the earth, it was not created just with a poof, but first this great living being of future Earth was created, macrocosm, and this needed to solidify and condense before it would be able to make human bodies. Yes, before it could make animal bodies, before it could even make plant bodies, it had to continually condense and cool off and begin to have continents and so on. And this stepwise process has other names. Now, this all belongs to the earth. And the first phase is called Polaris. And that the reason I want to be sure to get this for you is in the beginning, our earth, this mineral element that we are living in now wasn't here yet. It was just fire. And then that fire began to densify again. So let me go back to the essential point here. Polaris was kind of a repeat of ancient Saturn, a repeat. And we had the next one with a long name, Hyperborea, which was a repeat of ancient Sun. And it was air. There's more. This is just setting it up, right? And Lemuria was number 3, water. A repeat of ancient Moon. Infinitely, almost infinitely long time, great long time spans, and then Earth, where physical matter was to occur. But even back here, the Earth was not yet hard. So even matter didn't get as hard as it is now. And I love to read the work of so-called anthroposophical paleontologists. I love that. People who studied the fossil records and try to understand if the fossil record can show any light on the things that Rudolf Steiner is saying. Rudolf Steiner says, do you know who Haeckel is? You all know who Darwin is. And Haeckel's student and colleague was Darwin. The two of them worked on the evolutionary theory at about the same time. And Rudolf Steiner really valued their work. In fact, he dedicated his great work, Cosmic Evolution, to Haeckel. And he said somewhere, Haeckel is actually, I really like his evolutionary theory. It works. It's not that different from what we would do in anthroposophy, because we see this whole fossil record becoming more and more complex. The only problem, says Rudolf Steiner, is Haeckel hypothesizes a primitive animal who is our common ancestor, and he only made that one up. In fact, all of the forms that appear in the fossil records are forerunners of what was in the spiritual world waiting to be able to incarnate. So with that is a picture. Can you imagine with me? I said it was huge, look at that. I forgot to write Atlantis here. Atlantis and our time and our future here. The Earth back here, huge. And by here, the Earth had a lot of, we could almost imagine it to be a globe of water, almost, not quite, but like that, almost living water. And we must think that all of those fossils could well have been under the ocean. And that was where all of the limestone deposits, that's where the deposits, you know how much lime there is in the ocean. It's extraordinary. and then also the carbon. And then bit by bit, the waters would dry up. And then, so here I want to just send the first thought into embryology. Can you imagine a whole universe that's wet, or a whole globe that's wet? Just think how easy it would be to live in that space, especially how easy it would be to make babies in that space. We human beings weren't embodied at that time. We were still spiritual beings, but very primitive life forms were able to plant eggs or lay their eggs without any protective shell, no limestone around them. Even as we see with the fish today, they can just lay their eggs in the water. It's as if the fish had their first development way back in the time when the waters of the earth were nurturing, were safe. And that's why they have a so-called extrauterine development. And then, as the earth gradually became denser, we begin to see, we can imagine or hypothesize that the earth becomes drier. And then for the first time, the next step, important, the next step on the fossil record is that we have, well, first of all, amphibians who started by laying eggs in the water, and then they crawl out of the water like frogs. Yeah, so they still needed to be by the water, living vital water, to be able to procreate, but then they moved out. Humans aren't there yet, and looking down and saying, that's not any good for us yet, so to speak, okay? Of course, we weren't cognitive yet in any way. And then as the earth became even harder, we begin to see animals, the reptiles, who were the first to evolve the capacity to lay eggs. And these first eggs were laid in the sand, for instance, on the earth, but they made a special place to protect the incarnation process. So they need another alligator to be born. Zoom. They need to build a little home for that alligator to be born into, an egg. And because that egg is now not connected to the outer living waters, that egg also has to get a present to go with it. And that present is the egg yolk. And so they give it a little parcel of food to eat, lay it in the sand. And at that time, sand was still living enough that it could protect and nurture that egg. So I would like to propose to you that in those ancient times, outer nature was like a mother. It was like the mother body that we now as mammals lay, where we put our eggs into the mother body of the human. But at that time, all of nature was a mother body. Nature's getting harder. So now we have fire, we have lots of water, and we have some air. Many thoughts there to weave together. But I think I'm jumping a little, but you'll be with me. Then we get to the point where outer nature is no longer nurturing enough, and we have animals. Of course, I skipped over the dinosaurs, but they belong to the reptiles. Then we have the marsupials who lay their eggs and gestate inside the body, but then the little ones come out and they're in the world when they're just absolutely not capable of living on the earth. And eventually we get the higher mammals and then the human. Now, let me tell you about that a little bit, because and all this is important for our understanding of how we live in the four elements, that the mammals lay their eggs inside the human being or inside their mother organism, but different organs, different animals make their uterine development differently, so that I believe I told you a little bit of this before, but for instance, rats and the rodents, this roughly approximates the womb of the mother rat. There was the entrance where she was fertilized, and she has lots of little rat beings that almost look like they're sucking on teats inside of her uterus. That's the way the rats work. The lions, the carnivores, will create a placenta inside the mother body with a kind of like a ring-like belt inside, and they excrete a lot of enzymes so that they kind of they digest the mother flesh of the uterus. In doing that, they are kind of imitating what the reptiles could do by, or the earlier life forms, by letting the mother body give nourishment to the being before they're born into outer nature. For human beings, it's quite different, because in the human being, there's the entrance. The human egg finds the wall of the uterus, creates secretion so that it slips inside the mother body into the wall of the uterus, and then the wall of the uterus closes behind it. And then as the embryo proceeds to grow and grow and grow, it pushes the baby's getting bigger. I didn't change the size of the egg here, but the baby gets bigger and bigger and pushes the wall all the way out to the other side. That's the placenta, this big bag that the child is living in. And what's essential here to imagine is this child being a pure fire spirit being, capable of becoming human, coming from fire warmth, diving into the elements inside of the mother body. And this is so protected, such a complex thought. This inner space is so protected that it has never been in contact with the outer air. It has always, for millions of years, been connected to the human DNA, the human substantiality. And that human substantiality traces back to the original Polaris fire, the original Saturnine fire, the original substance out of which the world was born, out of which humans were developed. That is inside your body, your warm-bloodedness. Every other creature, except for the orangutans, the highest of the apes, every other animal, even the highest apes, except the orangutans, have this egg connected to some extent with the outer world, but the human being doesn't. The picture here is how the human being reveals to us the unique constitution of the human being. And in doing this, we're still tracking the question, how do we live? How did you get connected to matter? And with that is the question, as the earth was once this great watery sphere, it becomes smaller and smaller and smaller and more dead. It doesn't have nearly as much vitality as it did long ago when the fish were able to live in water everywhere, and the mollusks and the sea urchins. And you can imagine practically the whole planet watery. When the sands, when the life force of the sun was inside the earth. It's all separating out now. And it's not just because of climate change that we can say we live in a dying world. The geology is dying, and yet we as human beings still need to connect with it. And in connecting with it, we need to find our spiritual core, our source, our fire. This is why in all of the classes, the eurythmic classes and everything else I work with, I say, always try to be aware of your spiritual core inside your body, connected to the material world, grounded here. So let's take the next step. We are here on the earth. And well, no, I'll start with the body, first of all, the embryo. Turn it around in case I need a little bit more space to write. Is this going to work? It's tipped, but does it work for you, Michelle? Let me know if it doesn't, and I'll struggle to tip it back again.
I think that's fairly straight. Let's give it a go.
It's tipped towards me. That's my.
Gotcha. Okay.
But if it doesn't matter, that would be easier.
We can
Okay.
tilt our heads. My joke.
No, it's my head. I have to write like this. So we as human beings create, so we can see how we live in our bodies. We move, we do things in our body, we speak in our bodies, we think in our bodies. But how do we actually create this? How do we do this? And the best doorway is to understand this as a three-part system. Those of you who are familiar with Waldorf education will say, I know this one. Thinking, feeling, and willing. But I'll use these words: our head, chest, limbs, even more. Centered here in the head, we have the nerve sense system. Here we have what we call the rhythmic system, and here we have the metabolism and the limbs, both of which are our will systems. And right away in embryological development, we see that the body is built from two directions, from the head and from below. That these are two different streams of activity, and this has to mediate it. In our nerve sense system, we take in the sensations from the world, and we also think through the capacities of this head. But we learn that thinking is reflective until we develop living spiritual thinking. That's our next octave that we're aspiring to. We think with the head. The head, we learn, is actually from the past. The hard physical substance of the head is built on this ancient stream of wisdom that belongs on ancient Saturn. Where did I put them? Here. And in the embryo, the development begins with a very large head. You must have seen this. The head of the embryo is so big, and to begin with, the lower body is tiny. So that's the amnion part of the child. And that grows very quickly in the beginning with lots of vitality that reminds us of when the earth was like a big globe, so much vitality and creating nerves and connections and so on. And therefore, it rather quickly loses its vitality. And the lower body is kind of hung on to it. Of course, that's not literally true, but the lower body begins to build around the spinal cord, goes into the lungs, or into the limbs, sorry. And from the navel, then, this digestive tract is going to grow up and down. The whole digestive tract grows out of one tube. And this lower body, and listen carefully, this builds our capacity to make our own body. So here's the question: how do we do that? How does our spiritual self make a body? Physical, etheric, astral, and ego, independent ego. So in the nerve sense system, as I said, it has to do with ancient Saturn, becomes hard really fast, and then dies away pretty soon, or becomes rigid and doesn't grow very much at all after birth. The head, in that way, is really belonging to the physical part, the material, the mineral part of our body. And then the forces for renewal of the whole inner self have to come from the other pole. We're conscious in our heads. So we have the earth element in our head surrounding us, the earth element in the head, and then in the lower body, we have the earth element in the bones, in the interior of the body. You see that, right? Then, let me take the next step. There are two jumps here. So which journey will I take here? We're going to have to eat, right, to build up our body. But this material world outside of us has died away from what it was in the beginning, or is dying, is becoming sclerotized, is losing its vitality. Rudolf Steiner gives us this picture specifically. Anything that we need to eat the things of outer nature, but we need to transform the things of outer nature to become a human being inside of us, to make human substance. And whatever we're not able to transform literally becomes a poison for us. So in every process of eating and digesting, we have to tear down what was made. And this goes for your plants, your carrots. You have to tear away from the carrot the specific formative forces that made carrot. Or if you eat a piece of chicken, you have to tear down in all the proteins and all the fats, tear them away until you have a substance which we call chyle, C-H-Y-L. I'm going to linger with this for a moment. But in the process of tearing down substance, your human self develops the capacity to grow and become strong. In the tearing apart of nature, we get the building blocks of hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and carbon. We get these primal substances from what we are freeing up inside ourselves. And then we will excrete the things that we can't use. How do we do this? So I'll talk about the process of digestion then. We need to engage our own formative forces, our own elements. So everything that we eat has something of earth, air, water, and fire in it. So we set about, first of all, meeting the earth element of it by chewing it. We use the hardest part of our digestive system, the mouth, to tear apart the food, the first step. And in the same time, you know, we're working it over with our tongue, the rough surfaces of the tongue, and then we're salivating. And in salivating, we begin the process of just saturating all the food with water. And within 24 hours, no, within 2 hours, all of the food is in a watery substance. We've torn away the physical part and it becomes also watery inside us. Then the food passes down the esophagus into the stomach and meets more juices. So it moves from the physical body, the earth element in the mouth, and is absorbed into the air, into the water element. Saturated, and in the mouth, the stomach, and the rest of the digestive tract, you secrete every day 3 gallons of your own fluid. You've got that much liquid inside you that you just gush into the food that you eat so that it can become completely dissolved and thereby will be capable of being absorbed into your inner self. So you eat it, it goes into your stomach, and you meet it with the etheric forces of the alkaline substances, the ptyalin and so on in the stomach. And then you have air in your stomach too. We all know that we all belch, right? That is a constant reservoir of air that we have inside us. We also swallow some whenever we swallow anything. And that then is massaged through peristalsis, massaged into the food so that it becomes foamy. So what's in your stomach is very soon foamy. When it reaches the right chemical pH, it can then be taken in across the duodenum and then into the small intestine, where when it's ready, when you have completely changed it into chyle, it's absorbed into the bloodstream and goes directly, almost all the food, not the fats, but almost all the food goes directly into the liver. There, it is held in reserve as sugars and amino acids. But really, we have to say it's absorbed into a condition equivalent to the original archetypal warmth of Saturn, into the Saturnine fire. Inside the sacredness of your microcosm, what your body is, completely on the other side of your consciousness, so you don't know it unless you're sick, completely in those unconscious realms, you are transforming the outer world, tearing it down, offering it back to the primal archetypal formative forces that are inside of you. And then as a substance full of Saturnine warmth potentiality, this sits in your liver until you are necessary until you need it, mostly at night, and you start rebuilding your body. Building it up, getting engaged in substance. Now, the ego cannot do that directly. The ego can't work directly into the material world. It can only do it. So the ego works out of fire. The ego is born out of Saturn fire. So please impress that one powerfully on your understanding. The ego lives on that threshold between non-manifest and manifest, spirit and matter. And your ego, in its activity, can't get down to touch the earth element directly, but it is capable. I think I need to get back to this one. It is always capable of dealing with the sun forces, ancient, with this, the fire, the ego, working out of original power, can change the fire into air. The ego can change the fire into air, can work down into the air element. Now it gets really exciting. So it can work into the air element by means of your astral body. Now, those of you who know some of these anthroposophical teachings say, but my astral body is my feeling body, it's my sensing body, it's my soul body. That's true on the consciousness level. But our question right now is, how does the ego work into substance? It works by means of your astral body. So let me back up just a moment again. Our self, our spirit lives in our body in a couple of different ways. In the head, we're conscious, but we can't make and rejuvenate our body in our head. But in our metabolic system, we're not conscious, but we're constantly creating a new world, the world of our body. What we do in substance is a powerful capacity of spirit to work into matter. So you're building substance. Little side glance here. The partner of that activity is what you do with your limbs, because with your limbs, you're building a new world by touching things, hammering and nailing and building things. We're always affecting the world through our limbs. That's the way that the world, we touch it outwardly, but inwardly we're touching it through chemistry, by making enzymes and so on. And we're touching it also through the peristalsis, everything that the movements that go on. So our fire of our ego works into the astral body by means of this, and then works into the water body, and then can finally get into the earth body and completely tear away the formative forces of the things that you ate. We then create chyle. The chyle is then reduced to these amino acids and sugars and is stored. And then the ego needs to, once again, engage these bodies to build up your body. And in fact, these activities happen in different major organs. I can indicate to you which organs belong to which element, but it's a rather superficial assessment because they're all related to all of them. But the fire, not surprisingly, is related to the heart. That's a predominant element of the heart. The air is the kidney. Interesting. The astral quality, the feeling quality, happens in the air. The water, that's the liver. And the earth is what, surprisingly, is the least alive of our inner organs, the lungs. The lungs, if you've ever held them, they're very light and airy, but there's not a lot of metabolizing going on in them. They make themselves as transparent for the air as possible, and they don't really build things up. They just connect with the fire and make it possible for the fire to get into the body. All right, let's take another step here. What I haven't told you yet, and we'll work on that next time, is the ethers that are involved in all the elements. Because, as I said, the fire works into the air body, affecting that in the kidney, but wherever the fire meets the air, it creates light. Wherever the fire works into the water, it creates cosmic harmonies. And wherever the fire works into the earth, it creates cosmic harmonies. And these ethers are all capacities that enable the elements to stay connected with the cosmos so that they don't just fall into matter. There's a difference between dead water and living water, between dead air and living air. And if it's alive, it's because it has the etheric element permeating it. All right, one more little step here. In the human being, the head has the earth element outside. And inside the earth element of the head, we have then the cerebral spinal fluid. Very diagrammatically, the cerebral, all of this fluid in the head, that's really the manifestation of the etheric body in the head. Here's your earth element, the physical body. The cerebral spinal fluid is your water body, your etheric. Astral body, any guesses? The astral body is the brain itself and all the nerves that are coming into it, which enable this process of becoming conscious. So we have earth, water, air, fire. And because the ego is essentially, I'll put it a little higher, is essentially non-physical, the fire in the head is essentially just the brain sands and the pineal gland, like a little tiny anchor, which anchors this huge experience of consciousness that you need. But I said that the head and the limbs are polar opposites. In the limbs, the bones are on the inside. Where is the etheric body? In the limbs, the muscles, the watery muscles, just flowing, that which is not frozen into hard physical form, but it's capable of moving however you need to. The water. Where is the astral body? In the lower body. Where is the air element? In your skin. In all of these sense organs, everything that's coming in so you can self-perceive in your skin, that's the air element carrier of the astral body. All right, $24,000 question. Where is the ego? Here, in the lower body. Well, I've got it turned off, so I can't tell if you know. Everywhere in the outer world. In our heads, Our ego is almost not even material, but in our limbs, our ego is, the best thing to say would be, it's our karma, it's our destiny, it's what we meet in the world that we live in. We're not just our personality, we are the world that we're living in. But those of you who've been on this journey a little bit, you know that we also have to speak about the rhythmic system, the middle system, which is constantly mediating between the head and the limb system. How we breathe in, we breathe out. Breathing in, we take the outer world into us, and that enables us to have soul inside us through the air. Breathing out, we exhale our carbon dioxide, meaning we exhale our death forces, the carbon forces. We have to get that out, or we would be like a tree turning into cellulose. And we breathe in the life-giving oxygen and breathe out the carbon. And in the heart, that's the sternum, that's not the heart, but in the heart here, we're also always doing inside outside and taking the oxygen in, sending it out, bringing it back in, bringing the blood back in, giving carbon away. And the head also the heart also is always going head, limbs, head, limbs, in the two branches of the aorta going upwards and downwards. The warmth of our blood, where the fire lives in our body, the warmth of the blood is always mediating between the two. So in our last moments, I want to just acknowledge that the rhythmic system must be active between these two poles. The head has to be conscious. It's virtually an enclosed sphere that carries within it death-bringing forces. Every action of consciousness has to be a death-bringing process, overcoming growth so that we can focus in on what we need to be conscious of. And so the rhythmic system has to hold this on one side, death processes, you say up there, and overabundance of vitality and life and making and creating in the metabolism and in the limbs without a center point, the external center. The rhythmic system doesn't have its own fest, solid organ. It has these two organs of heart and lungs that are always in movement. That's where the rhythmic system is. Always pendulating between outside world, inside, outside, inside. And think of how in our eurythmic classes, for instance, I always say, be aware of yourself in your heart. That's where this ego, trying to become self-aware, holds its self-consciousness in time, holds this awareness of the fire burning inside your heart, not through the head. In the head, we must develop clear thinking, observation, we must learn, but the head isn't where you have your warm presence of being. Not in the limbs either. You dissolve into world there. In the heart, where you're living in this tenuous relationship between self and world, amongst earth, air, water, and fire, in the heart, you can feel God's voice. I am. All right. As I told you when I started this talk, I was a little bit nervous because there's so much to say. And even on reflecting on it, I realized perhaps I gave you too much. Perhaps there's a lot to bring. I certainly hope I gave you enough to intrigue you. and didn't confuse you. And I would be delighted to see what kinds of questions we have for a few minutes before we close. Michelle, I see there are no questions here on the board. I think.
There we go. It was all perfectly clear.
How nice.
Okay, so you gave us a lifetime of, a lifetime to ponder. Oh, thank you, Shirley. You asked a question that I was also wondering. Okay, first question. In the first lecture, you have mentioned about the alchemical process, which is called salt and salt or sulf. I don't really understand it. Where can I get this diagram or more readings about this? Occult science?
No, not occult science, Rudolph. But everything that I talked about tonight is the salt and sulfur process. Salt and sulfur process is essentially this process that, let me write God up here, or fire, original fire, thought, and here I'll write matter, but it also means anything that's manifest. And always in the creation, we have salt on here, the solidification. And up here, the word in English is sublimation. Taking something from the manifest world back into pure spirit, back into source, changing matter back into source, and taking original fire and condensing it. And all of the in-between steps along the way are called mercury. Not the element of mercury, but the process of the mercurial process. And that's what digestion's about. Outer nature has become Sol, and we have to sublimate it into sulfur, sulf. And all those steps of digestion were here, chewing and dissolving and turning it into chyle. They were all sublimating until we got back to original fire. And then we build up a body again and do a sol process. So the alchemical process is essentially learning how to move a substance back to source where it has a different kind of power, and move the substance back into matter where it is existing here in the tangible world. And Rudolf Steiner didn't talk too much about it. That wasn't his language. He used the occult science language of going through the elements. So I cannot give you a direct source on that, but it's everywhere underneath, inside all of his works.
Okay. And Judy said a lot to digest. No pun intended. I don't know. I liked your pun, Judy.
Yeah.
And then Sandra suggested Carl Jung's writings on alchemy and alchemical processes. And
Sandra, does he write about the alchemy as a soul process, or does he actually talk about it in this way, moving between spirit and matter? Because I would be surprised if he talks about spirit and matter, but he understands soul processes profoundly, but it's not the same thing. Maybe you can put your answer in there, Sandra.
Okay, we will wait for her answer to come in. And then Yoko said, have you written a book about this lecture series, or do you have some recommending resources for self-study?
Oh my goodness. Okay. I find it all over Rudolf Steiner. occult science no, I haven't written a book about it, but I find it everywhere I go. I find it in the medical work because I'm as a therapeutic eurythmist, we had a deep training in all of this, deep. And so I can also read the medical lecture, anthroposophical medicine, and yeah, occult science, first of all. And what else? Universe, Earth, and Man. That's a lecture series.
Universe, Earth,
And Man.
and Man. Okay.
There's one called The Four Ethers, which you might find interesting. This lecture here about the body's inside out is, I think, the 8th lecture in the curative education course. But in that course, Rudolf Steiner is talking about all of the elements. Yeah.
Curative education course.
Lecture, yeah,
Oh.
course, lecture series. And it shows up everywhere in the agriculture lectures. But, you know, I think my job in life is to, in my lectures, is to make Rudolf Steiner understandable. I hope, I hope that I made it understandable. It didn't just overwhelm you. I feel overwhelmed myself.
Okay,
Did
we'll come back to Sandra's answer. She said, yes, Jung is psychological, but understands the alchemy is really about the transformation of consciousness, not about literally changing lead to gold.
Yeah, but it's also about not lead to gold, but the thought, God's creative energy from fire, air, water, earth, and then back again. So it's not just a soul process, it's a substance process. And Jung understands it as he knows that it's also a soul process, but that's like an octave of the nature element of it.
Yes. Okay, Jeanette asked, did I miss air, water, and earth in the rhythmic system?
Maybe you did. As Jeanette, I don't quite get what you're asking. Obviously, we inhale air. And so that is the substance part of the breathing with the lungs. And obviously the blood, which streams through the heart on its many journeys through the body, that is the water portion of the rhythmic system. And in that, it is the central system. It is more connected with the water and the air than this one, which is more connected with the earth element, and this one, which is more connected with the or fire element, changing substance. Do you want to take that further, Jeanette?
Okay. Well, oh, wait a minute, here we go. Okay, Jeanette said, thank you. And William offered a couple of sources for the books you mentioned. And then Yoko said, yes, I understood you at least a lot of part. Thank you for your answer. I will listen to this recording again to deepen my understanding. Excellent idea. Yes. There we go.
Oh, good people. Yes, there's so much more. And I hope you live, and I hope you are so inspired by the question, how do you get into your body? how do you permeate it so that it's not cancerous, for instance, but it's you? A cancerous growth is when nature gets into your body and your ego can't humanize it, for instance. Or all inflammatory illnesses are ego illnesses, too much ego that's not working into substance in the right way. And all sclerotizing diseases are afflictions of the earth system. It would be coming too hard, like Mother Earth, and so on and so on.
Okay, William asked, where does the spirit reside in all of this?
Everywhere, every time I speak about the ego, that is the spirit, William. I wonder if you're asking something deeper than that, because that's really so powerfully true that that is your spirit. But I wonder if you were actually talking about the macrocosmic spirit. If you want to clarify, please do, but it's all about spirit. Spirit and matter, spirit is here, dealing with matter here.
And then Judy, yes, Judy, I'm not sure if yours is a question or statement. It says the mystery of dementia, ... Oh, and William said, yes, macro spirit.
Macrocosm and microcosm. So the macrocosmic spirit is at all times alive in the world. And let's be quite clear that we have an unconscious assumption that spirit is a place we need to go to. But spirit is actually a consciousness we need to develop to, we need to rise to. So the macrocosmic spirit, yes, is as big as the universe, as big as my mind can be, but it's also right here, everywhere. But it is not everywhere existing on a material level. It can, but as we've said, and as I tried to bring in all the classes, in order that we can be free, spirit is not going to interfere with us, not the macrocosmic spirit. Macrocosmic spirit says, hey, William, I want you to be a free agent, so you're on your own. I give you the gift of your own fire, and you will discover in yourself a perfect reflection of me. But if you're going to take evolution to the next step, you've got to do it yourself. I know I said that a little bit whimsical, but did that answer what you're looking for?
Emily, I appreciate your thoughts on that you're looking forward to sleeping on this. Well put. And Judy, going back to that question, the mystery of dementia, she said a weakness of astral.
The dementia, as we all know, it manifests as problems in the brain. You can see it there, but it's actually because a person is no longer incarnating into their body. Perhaps some of the brain plaque can be a result of not having used the brain properly, or too much aluminum. We all are hearing these things, but you're actually leaving your body prematurely. And yeah, we need a strong connection with the etheric body to build our memories. It is our memories that carry the etheric body that carries the pictures of our memories. And a person who is getting dementia is no longer able to use that with their ego. So this down here could be relatively healthy, doing what it needs to do, but the self just isn't touching in to get the information and deal with it.
Judy said leaving because of a weakness of the etheric.
Also because of the brain plaque. Also because of a lack of intentionality. Also, not being interested anymore in the earth. And thereby the etheric becomes weaker. But it's mostly that the ego can't read it anymore. It's just allowed itself to become untethered.
Okay, dear one, I'm guessing.
There's no William. I was wishing that William would say, yes, I've got it, or no, but William is, okay. William, if you're still there.
Yes.
Maybe one more thing. All right, you wanted to announce about the time change, and
Yes. So Saturday night, the time changes for many of us. For many of us, we do the fallback. But for some in the world, that is not the case. So just a reminder that next Thursday, and is that for the fourth and final lecture in this
Yes.
series? Okay.
yes,
For next Thursday, check your time with California's Pacific time. So we will begin the lecture at
6 p.m.
o'clock and 6
California
p.m.
time.
Okay, 6 p.m. Pacific time. So check yours against Pacific time so you'll know when to join us next Thursday. There we go.
And once again, I want to just heartily thank you for participating in this work with your donations. It's only possible because of that, with all these hours and hours of preparation. Thank you so much. If you're able to, give what you can, and if you can't, that's also perfectly fine. Thank you so much, and I hope you have fun digesting it. Thank you, Fred.
Oh, thank you, Cynthia, for your wisdom and your humor.
And thank you, Michelle, as always.
You're welcome. We'll see you next week.
See you next week, good people, for the lecture on the elemental beings and the ethers. Okay, thank you. Good night.
Good night.